Hi everyone, it's Shem. Here's another video, this time on how to install tubeless system onto a Honda CRF250L or CRF250 Rally or any other bike, because the procedure should be very similar. As with my other videos, this one is likely to be quite detailed and therefore quite lengthy, so if you cannot be bothered to watch it all, use the shortcuts in the description down below the video to jump to the section that you're interested in. Let me start the video by giving you a little bit of an overview of why I decided to try the tubeless system. So the first reason was that I was in need of new tires, and that gave me a good opportunity to actually try it, because you're supposed to install tubeless system only with new tires. So the tires I actually chosen are Michelin Tracker tires, and the front one is, that's if I can find a size, 90 by 90, obviously 21-inch rim size, and the rear one is 120 by 90, 18-inch rim size. So stock tires. I did not mind the stock tires whatsoever. I thought they were great when it was dry. In wet condition, when it was muddy, I've actually crashed because my front tire slipped. I mean, it sounds like I'm blaming the tire. It was most likely my mistake. Nonetheless, I think they can grip better, and this is why I decided to go for something with a little bit more of an aggressive tread pattern. And as you can see, it's spaced out a lot more than the tire, than the tread pattern on the stock tire, so that should give you a bit more traction in the kind of muddy or loose condition, but it will also make it more uncomfortable during the normal road riding. So we're just gonna have to see about it. So that's the reason number one. If you have watched any of my other videos, you will know that I'm quite passionate about making my CRF250L lighter, so passionate about weight reduction. And that's gonna sound silly, but I recently have installed a ultra heavy duty inner tube system with rim locks and wind balancing, and that added an extra 2 kilograms of weight versus the stock setup. So if you look at the stock setup, that came with a fairly lightweight inner tubes, and the whole setup weighs about 1.2 kilograms. And then if you look at the weight of heavy duty inner tubes, you know, that's nearly 1300 grams, that's nearly 1700 grams. And when you combine it with the extra weight of rim locks plus the balancing that you have to do in order to be able to ride comfortably on the motorway, you're adding an extra 2 kilograms of weight. And that's not just any weight, it's unsprung weight, which makes things even worse because it affects your suspension. And not that I could feel it much, you know, hand on heart, yes, maybe I could tell that the bike wasn't as nippy. I couldn't really feel that much in terms of how suspension was operating. Nonetheless, it's not the wheels is not really the place where you want to be adding weight. So I've been researching what else can I do to maintain the same functionality of the heavy duty inner tubes and rim locks. And what I mean by it is being able to reduce the pressure when, let's say, you're riding in the slippery conditions, sandy conditions and so on, to reduce the pressure of your inner tubes and then prevent the tire from slipping on the rim, as sometimes may happen, especially with more powerful bikes. I'm not implying that the CRF250L is powerful. Nonetheless, you know, it could happen, and I wanted to prevent that, hence the rim locks and ultra heavy duty inner tubes. So tubeless system will give me the same functionality, i.e. I'll be able to use a very little pressure if I want to, and because it's got a built-in rim lock, it will prevent that tire from slipping. Not only the rim lock, the whole inner tube, the whole tubeless system acts as a rim lock, so that will allow me to run the pressure very low and still prevent the tire from slipping on the rim. And if you look at the weight of it, I've already checked the weight of the front and back, that's 820 grams versus 1.2 kilograms here, and then 850 versus whooping nearly 1.7 kilograms. Yes, I will still have to balance that because it comes with a chunky bit of valving, which also acts as a rim lock in one place, so I will most likely have to add an extra 100, maybe even more grams to each wheel. Nonetheless, with all of that added, it's still gonna be significantly lighter than the heavy-duty inner tubes. So that's the second reason why I decided to try it. And when you compare it to the stock, I will put those weights once we finish the installation so we can compare it side by side with everything else. But when you look at it over here, yes, it's gonna be heavier than the stock setup, but much lighter than a heavy-duty inner tube, and it will give you the same features as the heavy-duty inner tube. So that's the second reason. Let's now move on to what the TUBliss system is and how it works, because some of you might not be familiar with this concept. So a TUBliss system is a clever way of converting your inner tube based system onto a tubeless system. Kind of tubeless, because the TUBliss system still has a small inner tube within it, but the purpose of this inner tube is not to fill the main air chamber, and it will make more sense once I start explaining what it is and how it works. So let me start by showing you what's included. So when you receive it, yes, you've got a few other bits and pieces, but the main components that will be inside your wheels are, you've got that small diameter high pressure inner tube, which you can see over here. And this inner tube is enclosed in plastic sleeving, which is quite rigid and quite, well, it's still flexible, but it's not soft. And then also you have a one spot rim lock, which you can see over here, and that rim lock also acts as a valve. So if I can demonstrate it here, you can see the rim lock is going through that plastic sleeving, and it's basically allowing you to transfer the air from this side of the plastic sleeving to the other side. Okay, so this is what you get with the system. Now let's see how it works. So you've got a great little drawing over here. As you can see, the gray part over here is your rim, the black part is your tire. So the black circle that you can see inside is the small diameter inner tube that we've seen over here. So it's a kind of cross section of it, which you can see over here. Then the red sleeving you can see over here, right, around this black inner tube. And what happens when you inflate that small inner tube to high pressure, right? It spreads apart, so the plastic sleeving wants to go sideways, right? By doing so, the plastic sleeving is creating an airtight seal between itself and the tire, right, side of your tire. So now you've got a seal between the plastic and the tire, which means that the chamber that was created above the plastic is now airtight, so you can fill it up with air. So that's how the system works. It's basically a really clever design, whereby by inflating this small system inside of your tire, you're creating a bigger or larger air chamber above it. And what that allows you to do is to run a relatively low pressure in that chamber and maintain the really high pressure in here. And there are some advantages to running a system like this. As you may know, professional riders, depending on the terrain that they're riding on, they might want to significantly lower the pressure of their tires, and having tubeless system will allow you to do it and prevent the snake bites. And what I mean by snake bites, if you never had one, is where if you've got a normal tube in the tire and you're running a low pressure and you kind of bottom out your tire where it squeezes the inner tube between the edges and results in like two puncture holes in the inner tube, which basically look like a snake bite. So that could be the case if you're running a thin wall inner tubes and you hit an obstacle which got a sort of fairly sharp edge. So by having a tubeless system, that will prevent that behavior. It will probably act even better than a heavy-duty inner tube, in a sense that even if you fully compress the tire with really low pressure in this chamber, the tire will then just stop on this plastic sleeving, which will prevent the small inner tube inside from getting any damage. So in theory, you should never get a snake bite with this type of system. So that's one of the advantages. tires. Another advantage of this system is that the whole sleeving, because it's under pressure and it spreads the tire apart, acts as a rim lock that runs around the perimeter of the wheel. Yes, you still have this 1-point rim lock that you can see here that gets sort of tightened by using this nut here, but also the whole system works as a rim lock around the perimeter of the wheel, which is not a bad thing. And lastly, and that's a quite good advantage, but I'm hoping I'm never going to have to use it, is how you repair the system when you get a puncture. So in this way, this system acts exactly the same way as a normal tubeless tire. What I mean by it is if you get a puncture from a nail or something, you just pull out the nail, you plug it in, and the tire is sorted. Whereas with the inner tube based system, you would have to then take the wheel of the bike, remove the inner tube, seal it or replace it with the new one, put it back on, so it's a lot more hassle. So with this tubeless system, you just plug in the hole, job's done, because you've got no inner tube in here, it's just air. And yes, there might be some edge cases where a nail goes through the tire and it actually punctures through your plastic sleeving, and then it punctures through the black high pressure inner tube. And in those edge cases, yes, you might have to go back to a normal old-fashioned inner tube. And I will always carry an inner tube with me just in case for this very purpose. So if I'm somewhere on the trail and that ever happens, I can always take the wheel off and put back a normal inner tube in. So that thing doesn't really concern me. So as you can see, there are quite few benefits to this system, and on top of that, I'm also getting the weight reduction, which is the benefit that I'm most excited about. And all in all, looking at the design of this system, how it's explained, the whole installation manual, it looks to me like a really well engineered product and really sleek design. Everything seems to be very clear, very well explained, and you get YouTube videos from them how to install it. So overall, I'm just curious to try it. We've been in the lockdown for a long time. I couldn't really ride the bike much, so I've been just spending money and trying to do new mods. So this is one of those that I've been curious about, and well, you can see me doing it and learning with me. So enjoy, and let's start the installation process. We're going to start by removing the wheel from the bike. In my case, I'll be installing the TUBliss system in the front wheel first. So this is the wheel that I'm going to remove first. As you can see, the bike is already jacked up. So in order to remove the front wheel, I'm gonna loosen up these two pinch bolts over here. And then once these are loose, I will remove the wheel axle and then slide the wheel forward. Just to be on the safe side, I might put something in between the brake pads, something clean, in case I happen to accidentally squeeze the brake lever or something like this. That will prevent the pistons from coming in too far and then not being able to go back. So again, it's a safety measure. You don't have to do it if you're careful. The front wheel has now been removed. I have put my wheel axle into a woodworking vise that I've got mounted here, just so it's easier and I don't have to do it on the ground, but to be honest, you can do it anywhere. You don't need a setup like this. So yes, the next thing we need to do is to remove the tire. And in order for me to do it, I need to release the pressure from the inner tube. And because I have previously installed the rim lock, I'm gonna have to remove that as well in order to be able to remove the tire. And obviously, because I have balanced the wheel before against the rim lock, I'm gonna have to remove those wheel weights as well. So this is what we're gonna do now. The tire has now been removed from the wheel. I have also removed the rubber band that protects the spokes from touching the inner tube, so this has been removed. And now we're moving on to the interesting part. So as you know, the tubeless system comes with two valves. The first one is to inflate the high pressure inner tube, and the second one is to inflate the main chamber within the tire, right? So we need two holes in the rim. And well, the good news is that the Honda CRF250L and Rally rims come with two pre-drilled holes. And you can see, where is it? There's one over here, which is the hole which is intended for a rim lock, and it comes with a little rubber seal. And there is another hole on the opposite side of the rim, which is obviously for your shredder valve. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we probably shouldn't use that second hole for tubeless installation. And the reason for that is that according to their manual, if you have a look over here, they recommend the two valves to be installed within the 4 spokes apart. So if you look at the number of spokes here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This is where the original shredder valve is, and this is where they recommend another valve, which is in this case the main valve for the tire pressure, okay? And I think the reason they do it that way is because it's a lot easier to install the tubeless sleeving without damaging it if you've got all the valves on one side. Because then they don't put any additional obstructions on the opposite direction, and it's much easier to kind of put it in place without pulling it or doing something like, you know, pinching the high pressure inner tube and things of that sort. So the recommendation from them is to install it 4 spokes apart, meaning that we're gonna have to drill a hole. Yes, I've considered doing it using the factory hole and installing the 2 valves in the opposite side of the rim. However, my thinking is it's probably with a little bit of patience doable in the garage, and it shouldn't be that much of a big deal. However, when I'm on the side of the road, or if I for any reason needs to dismantle the wheel, I'd like to be able to do it without damaging the tubeless system, and it's gonna be much easier to do it if both valves are on one side of the rim. So, you know, it's a kind of a choice. Drilling in the factory wheel makes me cringe, because, you know, drilling in the wheel, it's never a good idea, but I hear of people doing it and not having any issues, so I'm gonna give it a go, and you know, we'll take it from there. Fingers crossed I won't have any issues with rim cracking or anything of that nature. So the next step for me would be to count 4 spokes, mark the wheel from the outside direction, try to get in the center, and then I'm gonna drill a pilot hole with a small drill bit, and then I'm gonna drill a hole with a number 10 drill bit and probably file it out slightly to make it bigger. The recommendation from TUBliss is to drill it using number 11 hole. Number 11 drill bit. I don't have a number 11. The largest one for metal I have is number 10. So yes, that's why I'm gonna use that, and then use the file to make the hole slightly bigger. As you can hopefully see, this is where the original shredder valve hole is. So we're gonna count 4 spokes from that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we're gonna just put a dot there. So this is where we're gonna be drilling. Now we want to find the center, not only center between the sides of the wheels, but also center between those 2 spokes. So what I've done is I measured the distance between the spokes over here, end to end, and then divided it in 2, and that gives me 18.5 millimeters. So I'm now gonna put it against one edge of the spoke and mark it, okay? You probably won't be able to see it very well on the video, but I'm just scratching the surface slightly, and then I'm gonna do it from the opposite side to make sure that this is in the center, right? So I know that this is my center point, okay? Also, one thing to note, which I've not mentioned before, again, this is a little thing, it probably doesn't matter this much, but if you look at the hole from the original shredder valve, and then if you look at where the rim lock hole is, it's actually slightly closer to this side, okay? so it's not directly in front of the shredder hole valve, meaning that if you're gonna be drilling a hole anywhere, it's probably better to drill it on the other side when there is there are less holes, if you wish. It probably doesn't make any difference, but if I'm gonna drill a hole in a rim, I'd like to minimize the chances of anything going wrong, so it's better to drill it when there are less holes. So in my case, if this is the shredder valve hole, this is the rim lock hole, and there is kind of a smaller distance between them than on the opposite side of the rim, so I'm gonna be drilling an extra hole on this side. We now have a spot marked here, which is basically the distance between the center between the two spokes here. So now we need to find the center between the sides of the rim, and to be honest, because of the shape of the wheel, it's like a groove. Your bit naturally goes to the center of it, right? Even if you start drilling somewhere on the side, it will probably start sliding and you'll end up in the center. So it's not as critical, and you can probably do it by eye. What I've done, just to be extra safe, I've just measured the width of the wheel, and that was 56 millimeters. I then divided it by 2. That gave me 28 millimeters. So 28 mil from each side gives me the center point where you need to be drilling. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is just hole punch it. So that's where the center is, and okay, maybe one more. Okay, and we're ready to drill. Just remember, when you're drilling, make sure that you position the wheel so the metal particles and shavings that come from that don't go into your bearings or anything like that. It's not the end of the world, but if you can avoid it, why not? So that's why I put it sideways, so I can just, when I finish drilling, I'll just brush it off or vacuum it. One thing that you want to make sure is that you're drilling in parallel to the line that runs through the center of your wheel. So if you put let's say something straight against the center of your wheel and against the point that you've just marked, you have to make sure that you're parallel to that. Okay, so if you look from the side, that's how you should be positioning your drill bit. Okay, it's not super critical, but it's better to drill straight than not. So let me just double check. Right, so we now have a hole in place. So the last thing we need to do is to kind of deburr it, which I've already done with a file, but we just want to make sure that there are no sharp edges anywhere. Okay, that's what we're doing. And please bear in mind, I got a little too enthusiastic with the file, and I've actually got a 12 millimeter hole, so don't be like me, just measure before you do too much filing. But yeah, mistakes happen, and this is one of them, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But yeah, it's better to have a hole that's too small than too large, and think of it whatever you want. So the next step that I want to do is to degrease the whole rim, clean it all, because we're gonna be attaching the tape that was provided with the tubeless system. We now have to apply 3 layers of tape that came with this tubeless kit. And as you can see, this is the manual, and one thing to note here is that when you put those three layers of tape, you need to avoid overlapping it. In a sense, don't put one layer on top of the other. Try to fill the whole gap within that kind of rim groove over here. So one goes on the side, one goes in the center, and one goes over on the other side, but all of them are overlapping each other a little bit, so they cover the whole center groove of the rim. Okay, and also the kit came with a little plug that you're supposed to cover your other rim lock hole in the opposite side of the rim. However, I've tried it and it's useless because it's too small for the hole that I've got in the rim, so I'm gonna use the rubber one that came stock with the CRF250L. If you never fitted any rim locks in your rims, then you won't have to worry about it because the plug will already be installed in the rim. Apologies, my phone died during filming, so you didn't see the full thing, but you know, as you can hopefully see over here, I've tried to do 3 layers of tape and try to position it so it's covering the whole groove, and you've got 3 layers overlapping each other. I'm not sure if it's, you know, I've tried to do it as accurate as I could. In some places I might have gone too high. I'm hoping that's not gonna cause any issues with kind of tire pulling it or doing something along this line. So again, it's the first time I'm doing this type of thing, so you guys are kind of gonna have to learn with me. But you know, the tape is now on the rim, and the next thing we need to do is cut out the holes with a little scalpel knife. I've just realized when I've been fitting in the rubber plug to cover the stock rim lock hole, I've told you that this plastic one that came with the kit is useless because it's too small and it doesn't stay within the hole. Well, the reason for that is that actually when I checked in the manual, they intended for this to come from the outer side of the rim, so you're supposed to plug it in from this side and then put the tape around it, so tape would be keeping it in place. So if you don't have the factory rubber plug and you want to use the one that was provided with the TUBliss kit, you just have to remember that you're inserting it from the tire side of the rim, not from the spoke side, and this way the tape will hold it in place. Otherwise, if you've got the rubber one that came with the wheel, you just insert it from this side, and you can see it's a bit of a mushroom shape, so it actually stays within the rim and doesn't rely on the tape holding it. Our rim is now ready, so according to the manual, the next step is to lubricate the red sleeving. Manual refers to tire dressing type of compound. I don't have it, but I have a silicone lubricant, which should be perfectly fine for that type of thing. I also thought about using the soapy water, which we're gonna be using later, but for some reason manual requests that we use the tire type dressing, and a lot of those are silicone based, so I'm pretty sure that silicone lubricant will be fine for this purpose. So after this has been sprayed on the red sleeving, we're then gonna have to align our valves with the holes that we've got on the rim, and in order to do that we'll have to remove the high pressure inner tube and then align it within the sleeving so the hole distances are matching. And also we obviously gonna have to remove the caps, nuts, and we will remove the valve core from the high pressure inner tube to ensure that it can, you know, release all air that might be inside of it. Right, valves are now aligned with the holes on the rim. The sleeving is lubricated, so I'm gonna insert 2 valves in and start putting the red sleeving onto the rim. Once we put the rim lock side in, we're gonna put the nut on it, and that's gonna be just hand tight. And then once we put this valve in, we're just gonna put the nut on it, but don't tighten it. It's gonna be here just to prevent that from coming out, right? Whereas this one's gonna be hand tightened. So we're gonna start by this side, insert that in, and then we're gonna start putting the red sleeving inside the rim, starting at the rim lock and then moving towards the valve and all the way around. So we're gonna finish back at the rim lock. One thing to note, as with any tire changes, this works in a similar principle where you don't supposed to be fighting against it, and if you are, you're most likely doing something wrong. So when you put it in, it's supposed to, the red sleeve supposed to sit in that groove in the rim, right? Because that gives you more room on the other side of the rim. So once you're inserting it, make sure that it's not sitting on the outer part of the rim. It has to sit inside, which gives you then more room, and it's much easier to put it on the other side of the rim without damaging it. So every so often try to kind of squeeze it and make sure that all the way around the perimeter where you've already inserted it, it sits over here as opposed to sitting somewhere on the sides. Okay, it's now time to insert the rim inside the tire, and the process is slightly different than with the tubed tires. So first we're gonna have to install this guiding plate that comes with a kit. You probably could do it without it, but it's gonna make it easier if you have it. So the idea is to put that in your tire, then take your wheel with the rim lock pointing down and insert it within the tire. So we're gonna have to spread it with the tire spoons and make sure that the rim sits inside the tire. The rim is within the tire now, so the next thing we need to do is put the tire properly on the rim, and we're gonna start by doing that on the opposite direction of where the rim lock is. So we're gonna start on this side, but before we do that, we need to ensure that other side of the tire is kind of hanging there loose on the outer side of the rim, and we can see that around the perimeter, yes, the tire is on the outside. And when we start doing that, normally what you want to do when you put the tire on, similarly to the red liner, you want to get it in that groove of the tire to give you as much room as possible. Now you can see you've got the red liner sitting in that groove. So what we're gonna have to do once we start putting the tire on, push that red liner out of the way, and that will give us more room for the tire bit to sit in that inner groove. And this is demonstrated here in the manual, as you can see over here. You're pushing the tire in, squeezing that red liner, and that gives you a bit more room, so you've got so it should be easier to put the tire on the rim. One side of the tire is on the rim now, so I'm gonna flip the wheel 180 degrees and repeat the same process. One thing to note here is pay attention to the arrows of the tire on the tire, because some tires can be only mounted in a particular direction or should only rotate in one direction to work in the most effective way. The tire that I'm putting on can be mounted in both directions, so it doesn't really matter. Also, we're gonna have to use some soapy water to lubricate, well, not to lubricate, I think to aid with the seal between the red liner and the tire. At least that's what's recommended in the manual. If you're using a tire sealant, you shouldn't be using soapy water. I think there might be other things that you can use for that purpose, but for me, I'm gonna use that because I'm not planning to use any tire sealant floating inside my tire. Right, I had to pause the video, drop it on the ground and kind of put a lot more pressure to drop the tire inside the groove. Hardest tire change I ever done, and you know, partially it's probably my lack of experience. I also didn't have a proper tools for the job for filling in the tire. We really want that tire spoon with a little lip at the end, so fairly straight with a little edge, so it's easier to kind of put the tire through and then remove the spoon. So these are not ideal. So for the rear tire, I will go and get my Motion Pro tire spoons. And also, I found it that with the red bladder inside, it's really hard to drop that tire bit inside a groove, meaning that you don't have enough slack on the tire. So the last bit, when you have to pull it across the rim, it's really difficult. At least it was for me. I mean, yes, the tire might be stiffer than the stock tires, but still, this should not be this hard. And you know, if it's so hard, you're then risking that you're putting the tire spoon too deep, you might be puncturing the red inner sleeve or damaging it, so it's not ideal. It's much better if you could get the tire to sit properly in the groove, and then that gives you enough slack to fit it properly on the wheel. But hey, you know, I don't know if you know, I've done something wrong, or maybe that red sleeving inside is so kind of spread apart, even though I've released all the pressure from the high pressure inner tube, that I just couldn't get that tire in the groove. It might have also been the tape inside. Maybe I've put the tape too close to the edges of that groove or something along these lines, and it was blocking the tire bit from coming into that groove. But still, very difficult. So I'm going to now add a little bit more soapy water inside, because that should have been done now, and basically they recommend you going in and spraying the water in, but it's pretty tight in there, so I'm not sure how much extra I'll be able to add, but I'll try it anyway. And then once I finish, I will inflate the high pressure inner tube. I think it's 120 psi, and then I'll attempt to inflate the tire. So yeah, let's see how that works. Right, so we inflated the high pressure inner tube. I've put a cap on it and nut, but I'm not tightening the nut against the rim. The manual states you're supposed to tighten it against the plastic cap so it doesn't restrict any movement. Then this is 12 Newton meters, so I'm gonna tighten the rim lock now. Well, there's quite a lot of movement. Okay, so the tire is on. I cannot see any L leaking from anywhere, but again it might be a micro leak, and because how much trouble I had with putting that tire on, I want to just be 100% sure that I didn't damage anything in the installation process. So I'm going to leave it overnight before I even attempt to balance the wheel. I'm gonna make a note of the pressure in the bladder, and then pressure in the main tire chamber, and we will see if it's gonna be the same tomorrow morning. But you know, so far in terms of tire on the rim, it's even around the perimeter. I don't see any problems anywhere. Here we are, day after. I've checked the pressure in both chambers and the main tire chamber seems okay. I've put it up to 40 psi just to be sure, and it's 40 psi now, so it's perfect. This one I put it up to 120 psi, the high pressure inner tube, and it was at 119, maybe slightly over 19. So either some air might have escaped when I was connecting the pump, so it's round about there. But I'm gonna have to make an effort of checking pressure in that inner tube before every ride, and well, both actually, and that's what you should be doing anyway. But you know, with either tubeless tires or tube tires, I found it that in the past I did not necessarily check the pressure before every ride, and with this one it's kind of critical, because without the high pressure in that inner tube you can get into trouble where the main chamber doesn't hold the pressure and you could get a leak, or a lot air can escape pretty quickly. So it's essential to check that before every ride, and obviously while you check that you may as well check this one too. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some of the stickers on, and you know, I'm not a big fan of stickers in general, but those will be quite handy because it will remind you how much pressure to put in which chamber. So I'm not gonna bother with any of them apart from this that go near the valves. We're now ready to balance the wheel. I'm gonna be using the same weights as I did in my previous video. So brass weights with a little screw that you tighten and you put the weight on the spoke. Obviously you could use those add-on weights that you glue onto the rim, but the rim locks are quite heavy, so I found in the past that you would have to add huge amount of this, whereas you can only get away with adding a couple of this. So you know, this worked better for me in the past. For those of you not familiar with the balancing process, I'm using a mountain bike wheel balancing kit, but it could be anything as long as you can keep the axle parallel to the ground. And the idea is that if you pull the wheel up in any place, it should remain in that position, whereas if you look at it now without any balancing, the wheel moves down. The rim moves down, and the heaviest point would be at the bottom of the rim. So the idea is that we kind of gonna try to add a little bit of weight in the opposite side of the rim and see if that helps. And we're gonna be doing little by little, and eventually we should find the equilibrium point when there is enough weight added on the opposite side of the rim, so you can put the rim in any position, let go of it, and the rim will remain wherever you put it, which means that it's kind of evenly balanced in terms of weight around the perimeter of the rim. Right, I think we've got it. It's a bit more weight than what I was anticipating, and you know, the rim lock that I've seen in here is quite heavy, and it's on the outer side of the rim, which means that it's got more lever lid, so we probably added a lot more weight than the weight of the rim lock is, because the weight is on the inner side of the rim. So before I affix it properly, I'm gonna remove them, check the weight on the weight scale, just to, out of curiosity, see what they add up to, and then I'm gonna affix them properly. Yes, there is a little bit of stiction in the bearing, so maybe if the wheel was able to spin completely free, then it wouldn't be perfectly balanced. But for my needs, I think that's absolutely fine. You kind of get an equilibrium, and wherever you stop the wheel, it kind of stays in that position, which is what we wanted. I have now checked the weight of the weights that we've added, and they add up to 132 grams, so fair bit of weight. I have also installed them properly, and what I mean by it, I've added a small drop of Loctite into each of the threaded inserts that you put to tighten the weight onto the spoke, and that will hopefully make it more secure. I have also put a layer of tape around the perimeter, and in case the weight ever got loose, that should hopefully prevent it from flying off, and I will notice the weight rattling on the spoke before it actually flies off and wear through the tape. It hasn't happened to me before, but you know, no harm in adding a little bit of extra security for a little bit of tape. So the next step is for us to install the wheel onto the bike, and before I do that, I'm gonna degrease the brake disc in case I touched it with a greasy fingers or something like this. I don't want to put any crap into my brake pads. And once the disc brake is degreased, we're gonna put the spacers in on each side. They're exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one goes where. And then we're gonna mount the wheel into the bike. And we're gonna start by obviously inserting the wheel in between the fork legs, and the disc will have to go between the brake pads. We're gonna put the axle through and tighten it to 69 Newton meters. And before we actually tighten the pitch bolts, and this is an important step that I missed in my last video, and someone corrected me in the comment section down below. So we're gonna have to take the bike off the stand, press the front brake and pump the fork, and what that will do is it will align the axle in the holes over here a little bit better, because as you can see, the forks are obviously moving. So before you tighten the pinch bolts, you want to make sure that the axle is aligned with the holes properly, and the pressing the front brake and pumping the fork supposed to help with that. So once we do that, then we'll tighten the pinch bolts, and they need to be tightened to 22 Newton meters. And that will be it. Once the front wheel is installed, we're gonna jump and repeat the process on the back. We're now ready to remove the rear wheel, so we're gonna loosen that nut off. We're gonna remove the axle, because this kind of end is attached to the axle, so this is just holding it in place. And once that nut is loosened up and removed, we should be able to just punch the axle through. Once the axle is out, we will push the wheel forward slightly just to give us a bit more slack on the chain, put the chain aside, and then pull the wheel backwards, and we'll start taking the tire off. The rear wheel has now been removed, so the next step is to remove the tire off. Before we can do that, I'm gonna have to remove the valve core from that shredder valve, release or air, remove the nut here, remove the rim lock nut as well, and then remove the weights that I've added. And once this has been done and the air has been removed from the inner tube, I'm gonna start taking the tire off the rim. Right, the rubber tape has now been removed. We're ready to drill another hole. And if you look at where the factory shredder valve hole is and where the factory rim lock hole is, they're actually quite close to each other, even closer than on the front wheel. So similarly to what we've done before, we're gonna drill on this side, so the holes that we're drilling are spread apart evenly, or more evenly, as opposed to doing it in here, so 3 holes are very close to each other. So we're gonna go 4 spokes up from the shredder valve hole, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're gonna drill here. And as you can see, I've already marked the spot where I need to be drilling. I've measured the width of the wheel, that's 72 millimeters, divided by half, that's 36, so that's exactly the center spot. And again, we've got 36 millimeters between the edges of the spoke ends, and divided by half, that's 18, and you see the mark over here. So I'm gonna hole punch it, and then we're gonna start drilling again parallel to the line going through the center of the wheel. Okay, last time when I've been drilling the front wheel, I was too conscious about filming and not being in the way and so on, so I'm gonna try to do it without really worry about camera now, because last time my drill was in a bit of an angle. So when you do that, just make sure that you're not only matching that line that goes through the center of the wheel, but also that you're not skewing it either way, it just straight or parallel to the wheel, if you wish. As you can see, the hole is now ready. I've managed to keep it to 11 millimeters, so I didn't go too crazy with my filing, which is good. I have deburred the edges of the hole to make sure there are no sharp edges anywhere, and I've checked all the spokes as well to make sure there is nothing sharp sticking out here. all looking good. So the rim has been degreased as well to make sure that that sticks well, and we're ready to put that tape. We need 3 passes around the perimeter of the wheel. And similarly to the front, if you look at the manual, you don't want to have all 3 passes in the center of that middle groove. You want the first one in the center, the second one on the side, and the third one on the side. So the whole area of that inner groove of the rim is covered, but it's not all in the center like this. One last thing before we put the tape on, we need to plug in the stock rim lock hole, and I'm gonna use the stock rubber cover which comes from this side. So you can see it comes in here and it will nicely seal that hole. And if you look at it from the other side, it protrudes a little bit and the tape will go on top of it. I'm not having much luck with this taping business. That's the second time when I've been taping when the phone decided to turn itself off, so you didn't see the full thing. But anyway, this is fairly straightforward. Like I've said, 1 layer in the center, 1 on the side and 1 on the other side, and just try to ensure that the tape is not protruding from that groove here. So as you can see, you know, the tire can still sit over here and it doesn't catch the tape. So that's the idea. So let's cut the holes in the tape now. Okay, we are now ready to remove the valve cover and align the valves with the holes in the rim. So I'm gonna remove the valve cord from the high pressure inner tube now, and then we'll try to match the position of the holes. Right, everything is aligned, so the next thing we need to do is to spray that red sleeving with the silicone lubricant. Right, we can begin putting the bladder on. And first thing is hand tight the rim lock nut, not too tight, just put it against the rim. Okay, like so. And then the little nut that goes on the shredder valve, just put it on to prevent it from coming off. It's not against the rim, it's just fairly loose there. Okay, so again, what we want to do, similarly to the to what we did at the front, is to make sure that that red sleeving is always in that groove, right? So squeeze it as much as you can and make sure that it sits here, and that will give us more room. You don't want to fight against it, it should be fairly smooth to put it on. Right, so we're gonna start at the rim lock, moving towards the high pressure inner tube valve, and then we're gonna finish up the rim lock as well. If your tire is directional, now would be the time to pay attention to which way to put it on. Mine can be fitted both ways, so it doesn't really matter. So the next thing that we need to do is use that guide that was provided with the kit and put the rim inside of the tire, and make sure that the rim lock is pointing down. So like this. Right, we're ready to put the tire on, at least one side of it. Because I've struggled with putting the soapy water inside last time, so I'm gonna try to spray some in now. It's now time to put the one side of the tire on the rim. So we're gonna start on the opposite side of where the rim lock is. I ran out of memory on my phone, so you didn't see the full video of that, but one side of the tire is now on and it went relatively smooth. So I'm gonna flip the wheel over and try to put the other side on as well. As you can see, the tire is now on, and the whole process was much easier than at the front. And I think the reason for that is that the ratio between the width of the wheel and the width of the red liner that comes with the tubeless system is different to the front. So I think the rim on the back is much wider than the rim at the front, and the tubeless red sleeving is not much wider on the back, if wider at all. I think it might be the same width. So if you look at this drawing over here, when they tell you to kind of compress it in order to get the tire, well, one bit of the tire into that rim groove, I think at the front, because of how narrow the rim is, once you put the one side of the tire on, when you try to put the other side of the tire and compress it in order to put that bit of the tire into the groove here, there isn't much room, because the actual liner is fairly stiff. Sorry, the red sleeving is fairly stiff, so you have to push really hard in order to get that tire bit into the groove there. I'm suspecting that might have been the case why I've been struggling so much with the front tire and not with the rear tire, but you know, it could have been a user error as well. Nonetheless, the back tire is on, so the next thing that we want to do is to put the valve core back inside the high pressure inner tube, pump it up to 120 psi as per the manual, and then torque up this nut to 12 Newton meters, and then we'll be ready to fill the main chamber with air. Oh, one more thing actually, before I do all of that, I'm gonna pry the tire open and try to squirt some more soapy water. I've already added some, but the manual says it's better to add too much than not enough, so I'm gonna add a little bit more, and that should help with red liner sealing against the tire. We have now inflated the inner bladder, and the air is in the main chamber as well. I've listened for any leaks and I couldn't hear anything. I'm suspecting everything's gonna be alright based on what I've experienced with the front. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the stickers on, just as a reminder to how much pressure there should be in each chamber. I've already degreased the rim, so it should be fairly straightforward. The stickers are now on, so the next thing that we need to do is to balance the wheel, and the process will be exactly the same as with the front wheel. Basically, we are trying to add some weight on the opposite side of where the heavy rim lock is in order to find an equilibrium point, meaning that we can put the wheel in any position and it will stay where we left it, as opposed to doing this. So let's do it. As you can see, we've added a fair bit of weight. I think this is as good as I can get. And I'm gonna put it on the weight scale and report back the results. And also, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I've seen some air bubbles coming from the gap between the high pressure inner tube valve and the rim hole. So I'm suspecting that there might have been some air trapped between the red sleeve and the high pressure inner tube. At least I'm hoping that's what it is, because otherwise I'll be worried. Nonetheless, I've inflated the tire to either 20 or 40 psi. I'll double check, but I'm gonna check the pressure tomorrow to make sure that nothing escaped, and same with the high pressure inner tube. Same as with the front wheel, I have now affixed this properly, meaning I added a small drop of Loctite on each threaded screw that holds it in place, and I put a tape around it just in case it got loose. I'm hoping it's gonna keep it on the spoke, and I'm gonna hear it rattling before it actually has a chance to wear through the tape and fly off. Putting the real wheel on the bike is basically a reversal of how we removed it, but before I do that, I'm gonna degrease the rear brake disc in order to prevent any grease, in case I touched it with greasy fingers or something like this, going onto brake pads. You don't want that crap there, so yeah, it's always a good idea to degrease stuff after you finish working on it. And then once this is done, we're gonna put the spacers, one of those is here, on each side of the wheel, and then slide it in between the forks over here. Obviously, we're gonna have to get rid of the brake caliper out of the way, maybe put it on the other side of the forks, and then once the wheel is in place, I'm gonna navigate the caliper onto the brake disc, and then I'm gonna push the wheel forward in order to put the chain on the cock, and once the chain is in the right position, then we will pull the wheel back in order to align it with axle holes. And before we put the axle through, I'm gonna put a tiny coat of grease on the axle, and then we're gonna put it through and torque it up from that side to 88 Newton meters. One comment I would like to make here is that I've forgotten that the new tire will be slightly taller than the tire I've taken off the bike. So when I jacked up the bike, it was in a certain position, and because I've put the taller tire on, and taller because obviously it's not worn, I've been struggling to navigate the axle through. So remember, when you're putting a new tire on, just lift it up a little bit and it will be miles easier to put the axle through, and you won't have as much hassle as I did with this one. Let's now move on to my favorite subject, weight saving. So as you can see, I've now added the weight of balancing weights in here. So for both wheels, front and back, the whole TUBliss system weighs just short of 2 kilograms. When you compare it to the stock setup, so the thin wall Innertubes, that's an extra 723 grams. And then if we compare it to the heavy duty or ultra heavy duty Innertubes with rim locks, that's a saving of 1.3 kilograms. So you know, I think TUBliss is a kind of good balance between a little bit of extra weight against the stock, a lot of weight saving versus the heavy duty Innertubes, but giving you the same features, i.e. being able to run low pressure without worrying about the snake bites and few other benefits that I've already mentioned. So all in all, I think that TUBliss might be a good compromise between these three options, providing that it works well. And what I mean by it, I'm hoping that it won't leak air from the main tire chamber. I'm hoping that I won't have to top up the high pressure inner tube too often. Obviously I will have to do it before every ride, but you know, I wouldn't like any air leaks throughout the ride and me having to top it up while I'm on the trails or anything of that sort. If that was the case with the TUBliss system, then I wouldn't see it as a good compromise. But if it works as the designers intended for it to do, I think it will be a good balance between these three setups. And lastly, a few more comments about the overall installation process. So I think it went relatively well. As you know, I've been struggling with fitting the front tire on, and you know, it might have been me, it might have been because the front rim is much narrower than the rear one, so I've been having to fight with it a little bit more than I was anticipating. But without that, it was relatively straightforward. The manual is well presented, and I've not had any other issues apart from putting that front tire on. One thing that I would like to make you aware of is that the TUBliss is quite inconsistent in terms of numbers they give you. So for instance, in the manual it tells me that the high pressure inner tube has to be topped up to 120 psi. On the actual red sleeving it says that the pressure should not exceed 100 psi, and on the sticker on the rim it says that the pressure should be between 100 and 110 psi. So, you know, they're giving you three different information. I basically left it at 110 psi. I've reduced it from 120 to 110 and kind of, you know, stayed in the middle. So that's one thing. Another thing was the torque settings for the rim lock nut. I think the manual states 12 Newton meters, but on the actual sticker it says 15 Newton meters. So, you know, I left it at 12. But it would be nice if TUBliss were consistent in terms of the information that they give you with everything that comes in the kit. But that's enough about torque settings and me rattling about TUBliss, because overall, like I've said, it was a pretty easy to install with an exception of the front tire. One more thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the tire levers, and you know, I bought those cheapos somewhere on eBay, and you know, they are okay, but they are not as good as the Motion Pro, which I bought for carrying with me when I'm on the trail. And the reason for that is when you fit the tire on, at least for an inexperienced person like myself, I find that lip at the end of the tire spoon very handy, because when you put when you fit the tire on, it's much easier to grab that against the rim and kind of force the tire on, as opposed to having to do that and then struggling to remove the tire lever from it. So I much prefer to using that for putting the tires on, so I'm gonna see if I can find an equivalent of this tire levers for the garage and replace this. So that's one thing. And another thing is high pressure bladder. For those who are not familiar with this type of pumps, this is actually the pump for the for the suspension on my mountain bike. It goes up to let me have a look. In theory, you could take it up to 300 psi, but the tubeless system only requires, well, 100 to 120 psi, depending on where you look. So I've used that to top up the high pressure bladder, because with a normal bike pump or anything that you might be carrying with you on the trail, you won't be able to do it, because normal bike pumps don't have a sufficient amount of pressure to do it. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do when I go for longer trips, because I wouldn't like to carry two pumps with me. I would have to carry a normal pump and then this one, because of the high pressure inner tube. And I've seen some ones on eBay from a company called BBB. I think they do a lot of mountain bike accessories for road bikes, and they've got an option of low and high pressure. So the idea is that you can use the large chamber for topping up the tires, and then use the small chamber for high pressure applications. So in this case, I would only have to carry one pump with me, and I could do both jobs. So again, something to consider, because you know you're saving weight on the wheels, but then you have to carry 10 different pumps with you, which is obviously not ideal. So I'd like to have it all in one if possible, instead of having to carry two when I go trail riding. So yes, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, or if I have done something wrong, please correct me in the comment section below the video. I mean, we're all in it together, we're learning together. I'm trying to explain it the best I can, but I make mistakes. So if you spotted anything or something's not right, please comment in the comment section and we can all learn from it. Thanks again, and see you in the next video.